Welcome to Labor Lounge Podcast. I'm Anthony Abrantes, Assistant Executive Secretary Treasurer of the Eastern Atlantic States Regional Council of Carpenters, the Carpenters Union.
And I'm Cyndie Williams, Executive Director of the CCT. Together as your co-hosts, we'll explore the world of organized labor, bringing you behind-the-scenes stories and insights from inspiring union leaders, dedicated partners, and community change makers. In each episode, we dive into authentic conversation to uncover what unions are really about beyond the headlines and the myths.
Whether you're new to the movement or a union ally, our conversation, showcasing diverse voices and real-life stories, will explore union hurdles, triumphs, labor's rich history, its role in workforce development, all while shedding light on how unions create lasting change and foster economic growth and creating generational wealth.
Join us as we build a broader coalition, elevate future generations, and showcase how unions contribute to creating a positive cultural legacy.
Tune in, get informed, and find out how organized labor is making a difference.
Good to see you again, Anthony.
Same here.
Nice to meet you, Reverend.
My joy.
Cyndie, this is the first time we really get to engage, and
Sure.
we're really happy to have you on the show today. So
Happy
I'll
to
just
be
get
here.
started. Today we're joined by Willie Dwayne Francois III, who serves as Senior Pastor of Fountain Baptist Church in Summit, New Jersey, and President of the Black Church Center for Justice and Equality, a national think tank and policy advocacy organization. He also serves as the Associate Dean of NYTS and Associate Professor of Theology at Union Theological Seminary, where he directs the Master of Professional Studies at Sing Sing and Bedford Hills Correctional Facilities and co-directs the Doctor of Ministry program. His second book, titled Silencing White Noise, 6 Practices to Overcome Our Inaction on Race, was released in 2022. And his upcoming book is tentatively titled Outing Blue Privilege, a call for public love when public safety is not enough. Francois' pastoral activism takes shape around racial equity, economic justice, and criminal justice reform. He is a Phi Beta Kappa graduate of Morehouse College with a Bachelor of Arts in History and Religion, holds a Master of Divinity from Harvard Divinity School, and earned a Doctor of Ministry from Emory University. He serves as a commissioner of the Martin Luther King Jr. Commission of the New Jersey State Department and national co-chair of the Social Justice Commission of the Progressive National Baptist Convention. Francois co-authored the book Christian Minister's Manual for the Pulpit and the Public Square for All Denominations, the most progressive and comprehensive clergy resource and the first interdenominational manual written for Black clergy in 56 years. He also has bylines in HuffPost, The Hill, Religion Dispatches, Sojourners, and the Christian Century concerning a range of matters pivoting around race, class, and religion in America. Welcome, Reverend.
Thank you.
And I would say, Pastor, I've gotten to know you over the last couple of years, and what Cyndie kind of read in was really like probably the tip of the iceberg of what you're passionate about, what you're involved with, and where we've crossed paths is building one America, which I think has been enlightening for me, and I think for you, I hope as well, bringing the labor side in perspective. Sure. And I think one of the things that's important to us, I think important to the listeners, and Cyndie, is, a little bit of what your role is at Building One America and what the mission is of Building One America.
Sure. So thank you both for having me on the show today. And Anthony, it's been a real treasure to work with you over the last couple of years through Building One America and building these range of coalitions to bring about the things that we care about and the things that our state and country so desperately need, particularly in politically fraught moments like the one we are currently in. Building One America is a great container of multiple coalitions who are interested in restoring power to the people, particularly what it means to journey alongside a multiracial working class public that has been abandoned by our political systems, our political leaders, and are really being squeezed by the economic arrangements that are America, that are New Jersey. And so our investments are really in that, what we call that tripartite alliance, rebuilding the relationships between faith communities, labor unions, and the civil rights community. We've tended to be black-led, but not black-only. Paul Scully, who's our executive director, is white. But this idea that if we are able to bring these three threads back together, we can see the kinds of results that we saw in the 1960s, the types of results that have actually forced the United States to live up to its principles and its ideals on paper. And a part of this investment in a multiracial coalition has also been about thinking about the value of populism, right? And not allowing certain wings of the American political structure to lay claim to that, but really believing that there are people out here who are hurting, who are looking and searching for a message that resonates, that doesn't require you to divorce your race from your class, your gender from your sexuality, but we bring all of those identities together and we build power based on those identities, based on those interests together. And I think another thing that is as particular to Building One America is our investment in understanding how metropolitan areas work. What has been my experience in electoral politics is when people want to win the black vote, they go to Trenton, they go to Newark, they go to Atlantic City, they go to Camden, without realizing that the majority of black people in New Jersey, and this is true in a lot of states, live in the suburbs. So black people are dispersed across metropolitan areas, across regions, and there's a lot of suburban power that is being abandoned, that is being overlooked. And so Building One America is also interested in how do we build power across metropolitan areas, putting particular emphases on these suburban places with new black voters, new Latinx voters, even working class white voters that are just being overlooked because we have this calculus that black people live in certain places and white working class people live in certain places, without realizing that our country many of our suburbs are increasingly diverse, but that diversity is not as sustainable and not stable unless you have organizations like ours that are thinking about the uniquenesses of that and how do you build power in those places.
Yeah, I think you're dead on, because obviously we're both engaged in public policy and politics. And the message has always been, well, if we're going to focus on the black voter, we're talking about urban communities, right? We're never talking about suburban communities. I think to your point, those people are forgotten. But the other thing you had mentioned was a tripartite coalition. And I don't necessarily think people believe, for a couple of different reasons. They have short-term memory, they don't know history, and they definitely don't remember what happened in the past.
No, that's true.
So, how can we tell people about how organized labor, the labor movement, civil rights movement have intersected and how they've come together in history, and how I think they're really effective in what we're trying to do today? Because I don't think people really realize.
No, that's a great question. I think that, one, we have painted labor unions as more racist than any other institution. Obviously, American institutions struggle from whiteness. It is what it is, and labor unions are not immune to that. The same way we can be honest about the way black civil rights organizations have not been immune to patriarchy and homophobia. I mean, all of our institutions carry some isms that don't define the totality of who we are, but are things that we must continue to work on. So I think that our labor unions have been unfairly categorized as sort of authors of racism in the economic space, which is just not true. And we have, in a lot of ways, revised the economic agenda out of the civil rights movement, right? So we're not able to see that there was a fundamentally necessary handshake between organized labor and the civil rights movement that got us those gains that we can take for granted in this moment, but are unquestionably under attack in this moment on both sides, whether we're talking about labor, whether we're talking about civil rights. All of it is under attack in this current formation of this regime, however we want to talk about it. I think it's important to name that when these black vets come home, black service persons come home post-war, after fighting fascism and fighting authoritarianism, however we want to define what was happening, what we were attacking in World War II, you have these black service persons who come home and they are now reintegrated. And I use that very fictitiously there, or ironically, they're reintegrated into a society that is marked by the very same things that they claim that we were fighting abroad, that we hadn't done any work to fight here. I mean, I think it's worth noting that there's documentation that Hitler says he learns how to do segregation from the United States, right? And so we have this return of black service workers to the United States, and there is a little less tolerance for them, which gives us that civil rights spark, all right, to a great degree in terms of how organized it is. But you can't really talk about that moment and even the quasi integration that happens during the war without talking about A. Philip Randolph, one we call the historic dean of the Black labor movement, and I'm sure white labor folk appreciate the work of A. Philip Randolph as well. But, you know, you have in 1941, he's threatening a march on Washington that is around employment fairness, particularly in the Defense Department, but I'm sure it has implications across the federal government. He threatens a march on Washington in 1941. The president ends up allowing some levels of integration, some pay adjustments that overcome that. But that is one of the cardinal moments that launches what we know as the modern civil rights movement. And it is a movement, and it is a moment that is about employment. It is a moment that is about fairness in the workplace, governmental workplace, no question, but it's about fairness. And then A. Philip Randolph carries this work that ultimately gets us to the 1963 March on Washington. And this revisionist history is we forget it's the March on Washington for jobs and freedom, right? It is, we spend a lot of time thinking about Dr. King memorialized on the steps of the Lincoln Monument, where he's talking about white children holding hands with black children. Very important to the American project. I think that's very important. But he's also talking about a bounce check. He's also talking about a failed promissory note. He's talking about jobs in that speech. Many of the speakers there are talking about jobs. But you don't have that moment where Dr. King gives that iconic speech without the organizing of A. Philip Randolph, a labor savant, without UAW also putting a lot of resources in there. The speakers, we wouldn't have heard the speech without labor resources giving us the sound system. You have the AFL-CIO. I think they're merged at that point. Yeah, they have to be merged at that point. I think that happens in the 50s. I mean, they're doing a lot of the canvassing. They're doing a lot of the organizing to get people there, paying for buses, making sure that folk can get from the South, to Washington, D.C. You don't have those moments without that relationship between faith and labor. And then I think it's also worth saying, AFL-CIO being one, but so many other labor communities that are invested in the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 64, which we know has a lot of labor and employment and workplace implications tied into it. And then the Voting Rights Act of 65, which we don't just get those pieces of legislation, which are important. Labor is working on that with Dr. King, with the other civil rights leaders and the attorneys. But then all of the cases that come out of that, where now people are able to sue the government based on that legislation. And we have labor unions that are supporting those lawsuits as well. So without that history of being able to see the beauty of organized labor and civil rights together, we don't have any of those moments that we celebrate today. Yeah. I mean, we're getting ready to celebrate King Day. I mean, his birthday's tomorrow. I don't know when this is airing, so you might have to edit that out. His birthday is on the 15th. King Day is also on Inauguration Day, which has a lot of implications there as well. But we don't celebrate King. I mean, King doesn't do this in a vacuum. what really lifts King up as the leader who gets a federal holiday is because he understands the necessity to be committed to labor. And I think it's worth noting, he dies in Memphis on a labor mission, right? He dies in Memphis organizing with sanitation workers after a tragic death in a workplace. So the threads are everywhere. The threads are everywhere if we dare to see them.
I think people want to see them to see
True,
them, right?
true.
Because you don't know what you don't know.
True.
And I can tell you that what you just described, the majority of people in our society, whether they're white, black, or Latino, can't recognize what's happened in history and how there's intersectionality between labor and the civil rights movement. And I think even today, what we're seeing, and if anybody really knows about labor and data and who's coming into the labor movement and how, for the most part, organized labor is about creating generational wealth, regardless of what community you came from or what you look like.
Sure.
And we've seen how impactful organized labor could be when the opportunity is given to the black community, whether it's an urban community or a suburban community. And I think corporate America, the system we live in, sometimes resents that relationship. And what we're seeing is an old strategy of divide and conquer.
Sure.
We talk about this all the time when we're in forums together. The reality is when organized labor is doing the right thing and we're being intentional and holistic and making sure that we're representing everybody in our communities and we're creating power for people that may not necessarily always have it, that are vulnerable, that big business doesn't like that, right? Because what does power and education create? It changes your voting habits.
Sure.
It changes how you view policy.
Sure.
And how does that impact sometimes greed and the political environment we're in? Significantly.
Sure.
And it's almost like, hey, how do we hold people down as long as possible? And we don't want organized labor and unions to coalesce with the black and brown community because we don't want to empower certain folks.
Sure.
And that's the struggle that we're seeing even today, years, 60, 70, 80 years later, that we're still fighting the same battles when it's all about creating opportunity for folks that may not have had it. And if unions and the civil rights movement are the vehicle to do that, and when they're coming together and faith, why wouldn't we embrace that? Because it creates power for people. And power for people is not always in the interest of corporate America, right?
No.
Sure.
And that's probably one of the biggest barriers that we're facing even today, even though people don't recognize it. We're telling that story like, no way that's happening. No, it's happening. It's happening because we're fighting it every day.
Sure.
Threading the faith-based community into the conversation, how do you believe that faith-based organizations can connect to the labor movement and help with marginalized workers, labor workforce, etc.? What do you think?
So, great question. And I want to start where Anthony just left because we have to be clear that there's a type of capitalism that is totalizing and it is wealth stripping and wealth denying and power denying. And we just have to be honest about that there is a corporate class that benefits from our perceived powerlessness. There's a corporate class that thrives on being able to pull all the levers of our democracy, right? We just saw a presidential election where, the amount of cash that was, and that's just, this moment was just flush with cash. And, some people say, well, what were the results of that, right? I think faith communities offer a nation alongside the spiritual groundings that everyone takes seriously. I think that for me as a faith leader, I want to be in the work of leading a revolution of values. That's what Dr. King talks about. How do we move from a thing-centered society to a person-centered society? I think faith communities offer language for that. It offers ways for us to not think about the ways that we are enslaved to our employment, the way we are enslaved to our thirst for certain material and materialism, but really opportunities to think about how we care for one another, how we create greater infrastructures of belonging and care. I think faith communities offer that. That's not all they offer, but I think that's important for us to name. Like whether we identify in one of the Abrahamic religions, Islam, Judaism, or Christianity, whether we are connected to one of the more Eastern-based traditions, Buddhism, Hinduism, Baha'i, whatever. I think that what can be an undergirding value is to think about the sacredness of what it means to be human and how we're all responsible for caring for one another because of that sacredness that's inherent to who we are. And that kind of revolution of values, faith communities can help to lead. The other thing I think is, there is no greater organized unit in this country than faith communities. They meet every week. I don't know how often your locals meet, but faith communities meet every week. And honestly, they meet multiple days a week in mass. Whether we're talking about a learning experience or public worship, service opportunities, faith communities meet regularly. And that kind of organizing prowess, I think, could be helpful for thinking about advancing values that translate into policies, right? And we've seen this, right? That I come from traditions, the Black church traditions, that were born in opposition to slavery, born in opposition to the dehumanization and exploitation of Black labor, right? Slavery is nothing, if nothing else, it is the exploitation of Black labor. And, Black churches start in response to that, right? As a way of, one, reasserting their humanity and their dignity, and then an opportunity to organize to get free, whether that's the runoff movement where people are just leaving plantations. You have the Underground Railroad where people are organizing in order to go north. And we know some of the luminaries of that, like Harriet Tubman. Or you're talking about the abolitionist movement via policy, where you have Frederick Douglass claiming that power concedes nothing without a demand. Like, that all grows from the Black church. And so it's no wonder that you have people like Martin Luther King Jr., Fannie Lou Hamer, Rosa Parks, Ella Baker, who are based in Black faith traditions, who are now leading another movement as civil rights leaders, but civil rights leaders who are also religious leaders to a great degree. So I think that kind of history, while I named the very particular Black history, I think that is available to all faith communities for thinking about what is our role in making sure justice is realized, right? At our church, I talk about justice as an article of faith. For me, justice is where the spiritual and the political rendezvous. There's no separation between the political and the spiritual for me. I'm not talking about the partisan. I'm talking about the political, how we talk about power, how power is at work, how we build power. It should track alongside how we think about spiritual healthiness, spiritual wholeness, spiritual grounding, and justice is where both of those things meet. And if we're not doing justice as faith communities, I know for sure, if we're not doing justice as people who follow Jesus, then we are really just shredding most of what the Bible, both Hebrew Bible and New Testament, is about, because there's more about economic justice in the Hebrew Bible than almost any other topic. Jesus talks about money, not in terms of how do we accrue it, how do we hold on to it, how do we leverage it against people, but talking about injustice and how we redistribute in ways that I think we allow ourselves to ignore. But if we're not talking about justice, economic and other, then we're not practicing the fullness of the religion of Jesus.
Sure.
So one of the challenges of what you said is that, going back, people don't look at history and how history could be used to navigate where we're heading in the future. Sure. And the other problem is that institutions like the labor movement, civil rights movement, faith have been devalued, right? Sure. When the power is in the institution, not the people. How do we get back to making sure people understand the importance of coalescing around one another, especially when they share certain values, to make advances in society, not only for themselves and their families, but for communities as a whole? But how do we do that together? And what does that leadership look like?
And I'll add to that, too, because I really believe that no matter what faith denomination that you're in, coming back to the community and serving the community at large is what makes a functional church or place of worship, coming back and being almost a servant parish for your community is so important. How do we coalesce as different religions to be able to function?
One, I think that's powerful because I think that's embedded in the First Amendment. It's not there, but the idea that we can practice different religions and that is protected. And I think there's a tacit assumption that the practice of religion is supposed to make democracy better. It's supposed to make our form of republic better. It's built into the Constitution in ways that we don't often name. We need faith communities that understand that they have a role in distributing justice, in protecting the most vulnerable, more so than protecting its own institutionalism and protecting its own power, but protecting the vulnerable, the people that we claim we serve. I think that's really helpful for me to say out loud. We have sort of slumped or slouched into like transactional relationships, right? Instead of the kind of transformative relationships that I think, and organic relationships that I think are important, that we all have self-interest. We represent different communities, different constituencies that have, primary concerns that are different than other communities' primary concerns. But when you really sit down and hold these alongside each other, in most cases, those of us who are not a part of the corporate class, they don't cancel each other out. They really complement each other. And I think there needs to be these incubators, like these types of podcasts that are able to name that and really publish that in public discourse. I think right now public discourse has become so divisive. We're at a stage where I think the hyper competitiveness is rugged individualism at its worst, which we know has never really served this country, has never really served our democracy, never really brought our values into being. But that is so much of the discourse right now, that we do need voices like yours. We need voices. It's the moment where we say that we need certain types of faith communities, and we need civil rights leaders, and we need organizations, and we need labor organizations to rejoin the public discourse. Right? And not cede it to, the people who are more moneyed, the people who are more platform, but realizing that our voices have been the ones to make a difference. How do we change public discourse if we're not talking, if we're not engaging? And and to be clear, I think we're in a moment where I don't know how politically ambitious we can be, because we're going to be on defense.
Fractured opinions. Right?
When we have fractured opinions, and we're going to be on defense trying to defend everything we have now. I think we have to buckle down and figure out what is going to be a shared messaging. How do we realize this? We're better together than we are apart. Ethic, philosophy, and really lean in on the fact that everything that we love right now is potentially under attack. It is threatened. I know, milk is high. I know eggs are high. But there are worse things than expensive eggs and expensive milk. And some of that is the loss of our humanity, the loss of our shared sense of siblinghood. And we have to figure out, how do we contest that? Because I believe to get to a place that we are able to see each other as siblings, as brother, sister, and siblings, again, that helps questions around inflation. That allows us to have a shared attack on the things that we think are causing the economic angst right now. But if that fundamental commitment to shared values, that fundamental commitment to understanding our neighbor, even if that neighbor is a stranger, as our sibling, then we will continue to be in this closed circuit of competing for what we've been convinced are limited resources in a country that has more than any other country has ever had in the history of the world. It's that loss of siblinghood, or that lack of siblinghood, because I don't know if we ever really had it, but it's that lack of siblinghood across race, across gender, across class, across sexual identity, that that allows us to see each other as competition for scraps versus understanding now there's a lot of wealth that can be distributed in different ways that can give us the power to attack those things that we say are really hurting us, like inflation.
Yeah, we've had, I'd say this, so, we had segregation, we had integration, we had some progress over the last, 60, 70 years. But what I've seen more than ever is that while we're trying to be more progressive, we're regressing in many ways because we're creating more and more of these silos of individuals, right? Sure. At the same time, you have some very powerful people telling us we're each other's enemies, so we're not working together. Mm-hmm. And I think if there was ever a time to come together and come out of our silos, it's going to come down to leadership. Sure. Because, and I'll use Building One America as an example, I don't know any other vehicle, we'll call it a vehicle, that brings those three groups together to talk about what we're talking about. It's just not happening. Yeah. And I don't know if it's because organized labor is scared to talk about it, the faith community is scared to talk about it, or the civil rights community is scared to talk about it. But I think it's necessary. And it's going to come down to leadership taking control and changing the narrative and showing that we are unified. Sure. Whether we might have different interests, at the end of the day, our interests are going to create opportunity for the people that we represent. And I know our membership is a great example in many cases. One, they do sometimes fail to appreciate what they have as being part of our institution and what has been sacrificed for the last 140 years from when we were founded in 1881, right? Mm-hmm. We're founded in 1881 basically to protect immigrant European workers at the time for safe working conditions, work hours, sure. Just making sure they were going home to their families. It wasn't about having a great pension, having a great annuity, having a great paycheck. It wasn't about that. And we've progressed, but folks coming into our organization now and many unions now don't understand how we got to where we got. And it's not appreciated. It's not valued. So they don't give back to the institution. And I don't think that just applies to organized labor. I think it applies to the faith community, right? Sure, sure. People go to church.
And society at large.
They donate to make themselves feel better, not about the cause, right? Same thing with the civil rights community. People will reference things in the civil rights community, but if you look at them as individuals, what are they doing to make change based on those who came before them in the civil rights community? It's just not happening. So I think for folks like yourself, myself, Cyndie, that understand the mission, we need to enlighten some other folks that are making some decisions to be part of this process, because otherwise nothing's going to change and we're going to be constantly under attack. And listen, I'm nothing against capitalism. I think capitalism is good when you have a conscience, right? We don't need to. We don't have to sacrifice profits for people. You can have a balance of both. And I think if we come together collectively and we show that power, we can change the culture. We can change the narrative. It's going to take some time to do that, but it comes down to leadership at the end of the day.
Yeah, agreed. And getting behind economic justice is such a good cause and one major topic that labor leaders, as well as faith-based leaders, those type of focuses need to come into refinement, because especially with the progressive movement, there's so many different ideas, there's so many different opinions that it's hard to get behind that one cause. And trying to get behind this is the way, right? Creating that one unity and message.
No, I think that's a great point. And it's something that, Du Bois, W.E.B. Du Bois is writing about this same thing in the 1880s. He's talking about making a case that if the black laboring class and the white laboring class ever realized that they had more in common than they have disparate, we would have a real force for an economic revolution in this country. But you're right. There have been so many ways that we have accepted leaders that are able to exaggerate the differences, these narratives of difference, versus seeing what unifies us. And it's unified experience because, working class white folk are catching hell just as much as working class black people are in this country. But we're not able to see that because we have accepted and normalized leaders that exaggerate and feast on those differences, those enforced, those fabricated differences, that we do need a shift in leadership. We do need leaders who are able to sort of see beyond the haze of what currently is, and to be able to put pressure on politicians who are inevitably thinking about their next election, right? Politicians who have moral cowardice, who don't have the political will, the political love, the political courage to do anything ambitious because they're thinking about their next election. And generally thinking about their next election comes down to thinking about funding for that next election. How do I not lose those who feed my campaigns the most? But I mean, this has been a problem since the Reconstruction, or right after Reconstruction, of figuring out how do we tie these threads together when there's so much natural, so much organic overlap in what we want and what we need.
So, talking about leadership, in your perspective, because we're dealing with this internally as well, is forecasting into the future. Young folks that want to be activists, want to be labor leaders. How do we prepare them to navigate these muddy waters, especially on the faith side?
And how do they connect?
Yeah.
Right? How do they come together and connect?
Now, this is a good point. I've been curious about, we live in a so-called democracy, right? An indirect democracy at that, but democracy nonetheless. But where are the spaces where people learn how democracies work? Schools have been gutted of civics programs. Mm-hmm. I don't know if social studies still gives students the rungs, the tiers, the divisions of government from the federal to the local. I don't know where people act. I mean, before we think about what it means to become a leader and be an activist, well, how do we actually develop a democratic IQ?
Yeah.
How do we figure out, how do we learn how democracies work? Now, this is just before my time. You could learn how a bill came into being on a Saturday morning, right?
Yep.
That is
Yep.
not something that my son gets to grow up learn. Like, he likes Blippi and he likes a lot of other YouTube sensations, but they're not talking about how democracy works versus like a Schoolhouse Rock that they're giving generations. How does the bill become a bill? I'm just a bill on Capitol Hill. Like, where are people going to learn how to be small d Democrats or small r Republicans? How do we learn how to practice republicanism and democracy? And I think that churches, labor unions, civil rights organizations can be those classrooms, can be those incubators to help shape at least what it means to live in a democracy and how we practice it. So I think that's one thing that's necessary. We probably have to amend how we understand and what we mean by leadership. Mm-hmm. The Black Lives Matter movement, whether we think it was successful or not, the Occupy movement, whether we think it was successful or not, they were experimenting with what they would call leaderful movements, right? They were experimenting with democratic leadership, where they were trying not to have a centralized leader, but coming up with a structure of leadership that shared visibility, that shared decision making, that shared the responsibilities, versus the kind of charismatic ways that we think about, well, Dr. King was the leader, and therefore when Dr. King died, that's why the movement died. Frederick Douglass was the leader. That's why when Frederick Douglass decides to do something else, Reconstruction doesn't have the kind of power that it could have sustained. Right? We've developed these leader-centered groups versus group-centered leadership. Mm-hmm. I don't know what the right formula is, but I think that we have to keep experimenting with group-centered leadership, because that seems to be where younger generations are when they think about how a movement should be organized, how a movement should advance. And, there's some resistance to that, because that in some ways that means the black preacher doesn't have as much power as he, and I really mean he, historically that has been the case. I hope that we are healing from our patriarchy, at a more rapid pace than I can see. But, that means some of us have to give up power, not give up power, have to be willing to share power, right? It means that, I often hear, where's the church in this movement? Why isn't the black church a part of Black Lives Matter? And what I hear people saying is, and what they're really saying is, why don't we see more black clergy out here on the front lines? And I think that's very different than saying black churches are not present in the movement, because black churches are bigger than their clergy. right? To have, black women out there in large part is black church. I mean, you don't have black churches without black women. They make up at least 63% of black churches. Those numbers are probably even more generous in their favor than I'm naming right now. But we have to really consider what we mean by leadership and who are the trusted messengers. I think it is possible for labor unions, for civil rights, the legacy civil rights organizations and churches and faith communities to be a part of the answer without needing to be the face of the answer, without needing to be at the fore of the answer. How do we now support other entities that are emerging right now and giving them space to breathe and think about what they need and what's next, and we support them versus needing to be on the flyer, needing to be the keynote speaker, needing to be the light. I don't have the right balance for it because I know our voices are so necessary, because nothing has replaced the power, the institutional power of black churches for black people. Nothing has replaced the institutional power of organized labor for working class people. We haven't been replaced, but I think we have to continue to imagine what our role is, and that becomes a type of invitation to younger generations. But also naming that younger generations are going to be a part of our rank and file membership too. But how do we begin position them for leadership within our organization? People consider me a young pastor. I'm almost 40 now. I'm 38. I'm a year shy of when Dr. King was killed. I don't know if that's necessarily young anymore. And so I have to think about what does it mean to platform, leverage, and invest in a generation that's coming behind me. And I think that requires communication, that requires some mutual workshopping with the very people that we're talking about. But it's a different paradigm than what we have known it to be, and we just have to be okay with that.
Yeah, and I think one way, talking about generational education and leadership, we thought it was just as important to educate young folks that are coming through the system out on how government works, right?
Sure.
What was the labor movement like?
Sure.
Who'd made those sacrifices? The civil rights movement. Because to your point, those curriculums have been taken out of education, whether it was in middle school or high school.
Sure.
But we think it's extremely important to make sure that they're reintroduced back into the system, because whether you're going to be part of the civil rights movement, whether you're going to be part of the labor movement, whether you're a faith-based person, you still need to know what's actually happening. And actually, we're fortunate in New Jersey, there is a bill that's going to reintroduce civics, the labor movement, civil rights.
Love it.
There was a little pushback on it, which I thought was very interesting, right? When we're trying to empower young people to be part of the system, that we didn't want to educate them and give them the tools to be those leaders that we're looking for in the future.
Yeah, I'm learning that an uninformed electorate is probably the best currency for a lot of elected officials. They want us to not know what's going on.
Because you vote against your own interests.
And forget the crassness of how I say this, but they want to see us as stupid because they can exploit our ignorance. And a lot of them do think that we are stupid. I mean, they call us into their offices. They give us these platitudes about what they're working on and how much they value us. And then they spend the rest of the meeting telling us why there's so much opposition to it and how they can't get it done, right? And it's like, so what are we sending you there for if all you can do is come up with the reasons for why you can't get done the very things that you said you wanted to get done on the campaign trail?
There's always an excuse.
They treat us as if we are unsmart. And I think that is a part of the populist impulse, is reclaiming the intelligence, reasserting the intelligence of everyday people, everyday voters, rank and file workers, pew members, is to remind our elected officials that they are there because we put them there, and we have genius and intelligence within our own pockets, within our own, from the ground, that we are willing to assert in order to get what we need. But they treat us as if we are stupid. And because an uninformed electorate it's gold, it's currency for people who want to hold on to power.
And education is power.
And education is power. I mean, we've been hearing that
Yep.
my whole life, for sure, without really thinking about, no, there are material consequences to having an education and then acting upon that education. And I think there's something deeply spiritual about it too. Not spiritual in the sense that it drives us to God, which I think is cool too, but it awakens something within us that allows us to see ourselves as the solutions to the world's problems. One thing that I hope my son grows up knowing is that he was born to solve some problem, to be a part of some solution, because all of us are. We are the answers that we have been waiting for, if we can only access that education that gives us the time, gives us the framework for thinking about ourselves as solutions.
Yeah. And to that point, just going back to creating that structure behind group activism, who are some of the contemporary voices that you listen to that can bring that collective, that larger base, labor leaders, faith leaders? Who are some of those voices that you turn to or listen to create that group shared interest?
Sure. So, I mean, in my experience, Anthony is one of those leaders. He is, and I've been, committed to organized labor for most of my adult career in ministry. I actually start my work as an activist in New York City, working on the Fight for 15. Working with was it 1199? They're working with 1199 there, which I think was Dr. King said was his labor union, right? Working with them on this, and I'm gonna be honest. I didn't always agree with the leadership in New York the labor leadership in New York at that time, which is why I think that's what makes Anthony important. I think he gets it, that he's not renting collars, he's not trying to rent robes to bolster his own power, but really thinking about what's the mutual outcome? What are the mutual benefits that come from a type of relationship like this? So I think that's important. I think I look to folk like Fred Redmond, who is Secretary Treasurer of the AFL-CIO. He has long had an internationalist perspective that is encouraging, for particularly when I think about the global South and I think about the ways that African nations and South American nations have been intentionally squeezed of democracy and economic opportunity. His approach, whether he was fighting apartheid or, whether he is thinking about democracy in South America, that kind of internationalist approach to thinking about the power of labor to expand democracy is I think helpful. There's a pastor out of Dallas, who I deeply appreciate, one of my mentors, Reverend Frederick Douglass Haynes. He has been an outsized voice of carrying on this Black prophetic tradition. He was momentarily the successor to Jesse Jackson at the Rainbow Push Coalition, but I think he gets what we have been talking about today. So those are at least three leaders that come to mind. I know there are others, but those are three that come top of mind for me.
So what would you say, was probably the most transformative moment in your journey? How did Francois become Pastor Francois where we are today?
I think there are a couple of things that happened. One, I went to Morehouse College, the alma mater of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and on those hills, red clay hills at that, there was a type of formation of my faith that maybe also impacted Dr. King to be who he was, but this commitment to what we call the social gospel, being introduced to liberation theology on those hills, thinking about, Jesus not as God, but thinking about Jesus as revolutionary, thinking about Jesus as one who's doing community organizing with poor folk in first century Palestine. impacted me to a range of ways. So that's important. But what also brings me to this work, and a lot of my work has been in criminal justice, criminal legal reform, prison abolition, and it's a result of at least 3 of my cousins being justice involved, 2 having, cyclical relationships with the criminal justice system, and 1 being killed by police in Louisiana. Mm-hmm. And I went through this moment where I'm at Morehouse, all male college, and my cousins are in prison, all male facilities, right? And technically, Morehouse and a prison almost look the exact same, depending on the state. And I'm really questioning, like, how is it that I made it to Morehouse and my cousins are in prison? No more smart than they are, no more religious. I mean, we grow up in the same churches, the same faith practices, the same demands to get up at a certain time on Sunday morning to go to Sunday school, same type of demands. But how is, I'm sure I did illegal things as a kid as well, but how is it that I escaped? And I get to college and they're in prison. And so, like, grappling with that quasi survivor's remorse sort of led me deeper into thinking about, like, what's actually going on here and how can I be a part of the solution, which disabused me from thinking about myself as, meriting where I was, but understanding, no, there's something in the system that created a crack for me to get through that so many people who look like me don't get through that crack. So I've spent a lot of my life trying to leverage, if not contest, the kind of class privilege that I have, understanding that some of it I earned and some of it was just ceded to me for whatever reason, and figure out how do I use that as a way of building the kind of world that I want. But it really starts from this kind of sophomore at Morehouse, survivor's remorse around how did I get here? My cousins are there, and why is my church not saying anything about it? It's that kind of deafening silence from the church of my youth, where we're saying things like, oh, such and such is in the Bahamas. That's code for prison, right? Such and such is up the river. Such and such is out of town on vacation. Like, these are the kind of language. This is the kind of language we're using because of the shame-based nature of incarceration. Yep. And, like, why can't we talk about this as a faith community and figure out if this, Michelle Alexander gives me this language in, 2009, 2010, if mass incarceration is a civil rights issue and Black churches have been a part of, attacking, militating against these type of civil rights infractions, why aren't we saying anything about incarceration? So that drove a lot of my attention, which ultimately broadened to thinking about, racial economic justice as foundational for undoing systems of social control like prisons.
Wow.
Well, we're honored that, we've been fortunate enough to have the working relationship we have with you, particularly because leaders like yourself are few and far between that want to be part of solving the problems and not coming with excuses, to your point. So we were glad you had the opportunity to take the time to be here with us today. We look forward to working, obviously, in the future together and making impactful change, and look forward to a bright future.
I'm looking forward to it, and thanks for all you do. And we have some great fight ahead of us.
For sure do.
On a lot of fronts.
We certainly appreciate meeting you. I haven't had time to spend with you, so this has been really enlightening for me. I have a lot to dig into and learn about you and your story.
I think
it's Building One America is one that we want to talk about even a little bit deeper as we go on. So
and it's put us in a position where we've had to have those tough conversations that people weren't accustomed to having. And showcasing that we have more in common than we do against one another. And it's been extremely impactful. So thank you.
Well, thank you.